Serenity Valley Stories introduces Breakdown in Pere Cheney. The road to Pere Cheney was narrower and more winding than I had imagined. The dense forests on either side of us seemed to grow thicker with each passing mile, their shadows stretching longer as the sun dipped lower in the sky. I could feel the excitement bubbling in my chest, a mix of anticipation and nerves, though I wasn't about to admit it to Mike. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," I said, shaking my head with a grin. "You know there's nothing to these ghost stories, right?" Mike glanced over at me, smirking. "Of course. But hey, it's Halloween weekend, and it's not like we had anything better to do. Besides, it's all in good fun. We'll check out the old cemetery, debunk the spooky myths, and then head back to town for a late dinner. Easy peasy." The road began to deteriorate as we got closer to Pere Cheney, the asphalt giving way to gravel and dirt. The trees pressed in on us, their branches forming a skeletal canopy overhead. I shivered as the air grew colder, pulling my jacket tighter around me. "Is it just me, or did it suddenly get a lot colder?" I asked, glancing at the dashboard. The temperature gauge hadn't changed, but the chill in the air felt sharp, biting even. "It's just the woods playing tricks on you," Mike replied, though he reached to adjust the heat. "We're almost there. The map says the cemetery should be just up ahead." The car crested a small hill, and the trees opened up to reveal a clearing. In the center, surrounded by overgrown grass and wildflowers, lay the remnants of the Pere Cheney cemetery. The headstones were worn and crumbling, many of them leaning precariously or toppled over entirely. A few ancient oaks stood like sentinels over the graves, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows across the ground. Mike pulled the car to a stop just outside the cemetery's boundary, and we both got out. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a smell that clung to the back of my throat. "Wow," I murmured, looking around. "This place is even more rundown than I expected." Mike shrugged. "What did you think?" "It's been abandoned for over a century. The only thing haunting this place is neglect." We wandered through the cemetery, our footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky darkened to a deep, velvety blue. As we moved among the graves, reading the faded inscriptions, a strange stillness settled over the clearing. A chill ran down my spine, and I rubbed my arms to ward off the cold. "Okay, I'm officially creeped out. Let's take a few pictures and get out of here." Mike nodded, pulling out his phone to snap a few shots of the gravestones. He frowned at the screen. "Weird. No signal." I checked my own phone and found the same thing, no bars, no service. "That's odd. We had full signal just a minute ago." "Probably just the trees blocking the signal," Mike said, though there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. "Let's head back to the car." We turned to leave, but as we did, something caught my eye, a flicker of movement at the edge of the cemetery. I froze, staring into the shadows between the trees. "Mike, did you see that?" Mike followed my gaze, but the shadows were still. "See what?" "I thought I saw." "I don't know, something moving over there." I pointed, my finger trembling slightly. "Probably just an animal," Mike said, though he sounded less convinced than he would have liked. "Come on, let's go." We walked quickly back to the car, but as Mike reached for the door handle, the car's lights flickered and died. The engine, which had been idling quietly, sputtered and went silent. "What the hell?" Mike muttered, trying the key in the ignition. The engine cranked but refused to turn over. He tried again, but the car remained stubbornly dead. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around. The clearing was bathed in darkness now, the only light coming from the thin sliver of moon overhead. The trees loomed like dark figures, their branches rustling in the cold breeze. "Mike, what's going on?" "I don't know," he replied, frustration and fear creeping into his voice. "It was fine just a minute ago." I pulled out my phone again, but it was still useless. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. "Mike, I think we should leave. Now." "How?" "The car's dead, and we're miles from anywhere." Before I could respond, the air around us seemed to shift. A low, mournful wail echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. It was a sound that was both distant and impossibly close, like the wind whispering through the graveyard. Mike's eyes widened, and he turned to me. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "Let's go. We can walk back to the main road and try to flag someone down." We started walking, keeping close to each other as we moved away from the cemetery. The wail grew louder, more insistent, and was soon joined by other sounds, soft, shuffling footsteps, faint whispers, and the occasional sharp crack of a twig snapping underfoot. I felt eyes on me, though every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. "Mike, hurry," I urged, my voice shaking. We quickened our pace, but the noises only grew closer. The whispers were clearer now, like voices just at the edge of comprehension. The footsteps were behind us, to the sides, surrounding us. Panic clawed at my mind, and I broke into a run. Mike was right behind me, but his foot caught on something, and he stumbled, hitting the ground with a grunt. I skidded to a stop and turned back, reaching out to help him up. But as I bent down, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a pair of faintly glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness just beyond the trees. They blinked slowly, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Jess, we need to go," Mike said, his voice shaking as he scrambled to his feet. We ran, not daring to look back. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees crowding the narrow path. The sounds of pursuit were all around us now, rustling leaves, snapping branches, and those terrible, disembodied whispers. Just when I thought I couldn't run any farther, we burst out of the trees and onto the main road. We stopped, gasping for breath, our eyes wild with fear. The road was empty, silent except for the pounding of our hearts. I looked back at the path we had just fled, half expecting to see something emerge from the darkness. But there was nothing, only the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. "Mike, what was that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know," he replied, still breathing heavily. "But I don't want to find out. Let's just keep walking. Maybe we'll find a house or a car." We walked along the road in silence, too scared to talk, every noise in the forest making us jump. Hours seemed to pass, but it was hard to tell in the darkness. The cold seeped into our bones, and our exhaustion was only kept at bay by adrenaline. Finally, just as the first light of dawn began to touch the sky, we saw headlights approaching. A beat-up old pickup truck rumbled down the road, and I waved it down, relief flooding through me. The truck pulled over, and an elderly man leaned out the window, looking at us with concern. "What are you kids doing out here at this hour?" "Our car broke down near the old cemetery," Mike explained quickly. "Can you give us a ride back?" The man nodded, gesturing for us to get in. "You're lucky I came by. Not many folks drive this road, especially near Pere Cheney." We climbed into the truck's cab, grateful for the warmth. The man didn't ask any more questions, but as he drove back toward the cemetery, I noticed him glancing at us out of the corner of his eye. We arrived back at the clearing where our car had died, and I was almost afraid to look. But there it was, sitting exactly where we had left it, as if nothing had happened. The man stopped the truck, and Mike hesitated before getting out. "Thanks," Mike said. "We really appreciate it." "Don't mention it," the man replied, his voice gruff. "You kids be careful, now. This place has a way of getting under your skin." Mike and I nodded, and we both felt an unspoken understanding pass between us. As we climbed back into our car, Mike tried the ignition one more time. The engine roared to life without hesitation, purring as if it had never stalled. We drove away in silence, not daring to look back. The forest receded, and soon we were back on paved roads, the morning light chasing away the shadows of the night. As we finally neared civilization, I glanced at Mike, my face pale and drawn. Do you think? Mike shook his head, cutting me off. Let's not talk about it. Let's just get home. We never spoke of that night again, but the memory lingered, a shadow in the back of our minds. And every so often, when I find myself alone in the dark, I can still hear the faintest echo of those whispers, reminding me that some places are better left undisturbed. Thank you for listening to Serenity Valley Stories, and please don't forget to like and subscribe.